Hello, my name is Christy Marina, and this is a PowerPoint presentation for Peachtree Securities Incorporated stock valuation, Case B, for Financial Management 139 on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4 o'clock until 5:15. In question 1, Part A, for Series A, I was asked to find the nominal rate of return, which is the annual dividend of $4.32 divided by the stock price of $48, and that resulted in 9%. And then I was asked to find the effective annual rate of return, which resulted in 9.31%. In Part B, for Series F, we're asked to find the current value per share and to take into consideration that the dividends are paid quarterly. So the present value resulted in $226.72. In question 2, Part A, what was TECO's expected rate of return at the beginning of 1992? And you find the expected rate of return by taking the dividend divided by price and adding that to the growth rate. And that resulted in 14.09%. In Part B, it asks what was the expected dividend yield and expected capital gains yield on January 1st, 1992. And the expected dividend yield is the dividend divided by price, and that resulted in 8.09%. And the capital gains yield, you have to take the ending price minus the initial price divided by the initial price, and what we calculated was 6.02%. In Part C, it asked what is the relationship between dividend yield and capital gains yield over time under the constant growth assumptions. And the answer is the constant growth assumptions values the stock based on the assumption that the stock price will grow at a constant rate. So assuming the stock price grows at some determinable rate, we can find the price of the stock at expiration and determine the payoff today. Since both dividends and price grow at the same rate, the relationship between dividend yield and capital gains yield is that they will remain constant over time. In Part D, it asks what conditions must hold to use the constant growth Gordon model and give real-world stocks that satisfy those assumptions. Since the constant growth model is based on the assumptions that dividends and price will grow at a constant rate forever, the company's earnings should also grow at the same constant rate and not at an excessive rate. The real-world stocks that would satisfy the constant growth assumptions are large and established companies with a steady growth rate. In question 3, we needed to calculate the annual dividends before we could answer the subparts. In Part A, the question was, what was the value of TECO stock on January 1st, 1992, with a required rate of return of 13.5%? And the value of the TECO stock calculated was $30.29. In Part B, it asked us to find the expected stock price at the end of 1992, which resulted in $28.53. In Part C, it asked what the expected stock price at the end of 1993 was, and that calculated to $30.27. In Part D, we were asked to find the expected dividend yields, capital gain yield, and total return for 1992. And the dividend yield was calculated by taking the dividend price divided by the expected price, which resulted in 7.5%. Next, the capital gains yield is the ending price again minus the beginning price divided by the beginning, which resulted in 5.94%. And lastly, the total yield is the sum of both the capital gains yield and the dividend yield, which is 13.44%. In Part E, the question is if the dividend was expected to remain constant at $1.80 for the next 5 years and then grow constant at 6%, would TECO stock value be higher or lower than my answer in Part A? And the answer is the expected stock price was dividend divided by the required rate of return minus the growth rate, which was $25.47. And then you added the $1.80 dividend, which resulted in $27.27. And the net present value of that $27.27 was $19.78, which is lower than the $30.28 calculated in Part A. Next, it asked, was considering the $22.26 TECO stock price at the beginning of 1992, what is the stock's expected rate of return at the beginning of 1992? And again, the expected rate of return is calculated by taking the dividend divided by price and adding the growth rate, which results in $19.14. Continuing on question 3, part F, we're asked to find if the total assumed 6% growth rate was reasonable and what has been the trend. And based on the table provided in the case, the assumed growth rate of 6% is reasonable because it is within the trend of 6 to 7.5%. In part G, it asks, giving the value lines ROE estimations for 95 through 97 and the projected earnings and dividends per share for the same period, would those figures help develop a long-run sustainable growth rate? And the answer is you have to find the growth rate with the retention ratio first, which we calculated to 5.28%. So based on the calculations, those figures should not be used because 5.28% is significantly lower than the 7.5% growth rate that was given in the problem. In the long run, it would not be a true estimate of the rate of growth potential for a company's revenues, earnings, and dividends. And that is the end of this PowerPoint presentation. Thank you very much.